Hello, listeners and viewers, and welcome to the very first episode of The Advocate Weekly, your new go-to source for LGBTQ plus news, brought to you by The Advocate. I'm your host, Kevin Ortega-Rojas, and I will be here every week bringing you the most important stories impacting our community. This week, we'll be discussing state leaders standing up against Donald Trump's anti-LGBTQ plus policies, two tragic losses for our transgender community, and legal action targeting LGBTQ plus merchandise. Later in the show, I'll be chatting with Advocate staff writer Ryan Adamczeski to get a behind the scenes look at some of the stories impacting our community. And stick around because I sat down with the stars of Revry's new original series, Unconventional, Kit Williamson and James Bland. You don't want to miss it. Let's dive into this week's headlines. Let's start with politics. Democratic governors J.B. Pritzker of Illinois and Janet Mills of Maine are standing strong in opposition of President Trump's recent anti-LGBTQ plus policies. Governor Mills, a former district attorney and attorney general, has condemned the administration's executive order titled Keep Men Out of Women's Sports, which aims to ban transgender girls from participating in school sports. Trump confronted Mills at a governor's meeting and threatened to withhold federal funds from Maine unless the state complied with his directive. Governor Mills responded firmly. Here's that moment.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way, that's good. But I understand Maine, is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
Not here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one.
Similarly, during his State of the State address, Governor Pritzker delivered a forceful rebuke of the Trump administration's anti-LGBTQ plus policies, warning that such actions mirror the early stages of regimes like Nazi Germany. He emphasized the importance of standing against hate and protecting the rights of all citizens. Take a listen.
After we've discriminated against, deported, or disparaged all the immigrants and the gay and lesbian and transgender people, the developmentally disabled, the women, and the minorities, once we've ostracized our neighbors and betrayed our friends, after that, when the problems we started with are still there staring us in the face, what comes next?
Whether or not our allies in government will be enough remains to be seen. Ultimately, it looks like it will be up to the courts to stop President Trump's executive actions. Now we turn to a heartbreaking reality for our community. We are mourning the loss of not just one, but two transgender lives to fatal violence, Tahiry Broom and Sam Nordquist. Tahiry, a Black trans woman, was found dead in a burning car in Michigan, marking yet another tragic instance of violence against Black trans women in America. Police arrested Robert Ridges III just hours later at a casino. Authorities believe a gun found at his home was used to kill Tahiry. Ridges has been charged with second-degree murder, carrying concealed weapons, and felony firearm possession. Tahiry's family remembers her as a kind-hearted and vibrant person. Meanwhile, a 24-year-old transgender man named Sam Nordquist was found dead in upstate New York after police say he endured months of physical abuse. Sam had traveled to New York to meet someone he connected with online, but unfortunately never returned home. At least 7 individuals have been arrested and charged with second-degree murder in connection with his death. Despite the horrific nature of both crimes, neither has been classified a hate crime by police. This brings us to an important question. What constitutes a hate crime? According to the Justice Department website, the Department of Justice enforces federal hate crime laws that cover certain crimes committed on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. However, proving that a crime was motivated by bias requires specific evidence, which often makes prosecution difficult. We will continue to cover the stories of Tahiry, Broom, and Sam Nordquist and hope that justice is served. In legal news, Florida's Attorney General has threatened a federal lawsuit against retail giant Target. He claims that Target, quote, engaged in a marketing campaign targeting and sexualizing children. He says, you'll remember Target promoted rainbow sports bras for boys, children's swimsuits with transgender features, and books for kids that asked them to question their biological reality. Of course, Target was not sexualizing children by putting rainbows on clothing items, and no children's books asked children to question their gender identity. Target is also being sued for allegedly misleading investors by promoting DEI initiatives, including the sale of LGBTQ plus merchandise aimed at youth. These legal actions reflect a broader trend where corporations face challenges over their DEI policies, a reminder of the ongoing battles surrounding LGBTQ plus inclusion in the marketplace. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll be joined by Advocate staff writer Ryan Adamczeski. And we are back with Advocate staff writer Ryan Adamczeski. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. We wanted to talk a little bit more about your recent story involving former NFL player Chris Cluey. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So for those of you who might not have heard about this story, you might have seen the clip because it's gone super viral online of him speaking at a recent city council meeting in Huntington Beach, California, where they were debating on whether or not to hang this MAGA plaque in the local library. And he spoke out against it. And it's actually not the first time he's been to a local city council meeting. He attends them pretty regularly, but it was the first time he got arrested at one. And he got arrested not for his remarks, but because he engaged in an act of civil disobedience.
During his remarks, he did specifically mention LGBTQ plus people. And this isn't the first time that he's done something like that, right?
Yeah, so I'm actually Minnesotan. I grew up in the Twin Cities, shout out Oakdale. But I remember when I was in, I think it was middle school, when they were having that debate on whether or not to make it okay to prohibit same-sex marriage was the amendment they were debating. And I remember seeing his commercials when he was on the Minnesota Vikings, the NFL team. He did commercials for, I think it was a Minnesota LGBTQ group that was fighting against that amendment, and they won. It did not get passed.
Mhm.
And now he goes to his city council meetings and speaks in defense of LGBTQ people.
Were you able to talk to him?
Yeah, so I did talk to him about 2 days after it happened. And what really struck me about his speech is, he started with transgender people and talking about how Republicans are trying to erase them. And he said that he did that on purpose. He said that he brought transgender people up first because, as we've seen historically, when fascists, let's just say movements, come in and try to erase transgender people, they're usually the first group to go, right? It goes transgender people, gay people, other minority groups. And we're seeing that today. We're seeing trans people and immigrants being the first targets of this new administration.
And so what did he say about his feelings following that incident? Because as you mentioned, this is the first time that he's been arrested. So did he have any regrets about it?
He had no regrets. He's willing to do it again. He actually said that he was thinking he was going to get arrested. Wasn't specifically planning to, but he knew it was very much a possibility. He said that, he is trying to inspire others to do the same because he is obviously someone who votes Democrat, and he wants the people he puts in office, as many of us do, to put their money where their mouth is and start defending civil rights. He said specifically that this is the party of John Lewis. This is the party of cause good trouble. So civil disobedience is absolutely a necessity as we go forward.
Was he charged with anything?
He was removed from the meeting and he was charged, I believe, with a misdemeanor. And that doesn't typically happen in cases like this. Usually they just remove you from the meeting. And he noted this in our conversation. He said that he couldn't believe that the city's law enforcement doesn't have better things to do than to charge him. I believe his court date's in April. He's in contact with legal representation in the ACLU, but we're just going to have to go from there.
And so even with these charges pending, he's considering going back and doing this again.
Well, if something else comes up, yeah. He's been
Yeah.
speaking out against a number of ordinances the past few years with a local committee in Huntington Beach that have been protesting book bans at the library. They've been protesting the privatization of the library. So there's been a lot going on here in this, it's in California. So it's what we'd typically consider a blue, a liberal, maybe a safe area.
Yeah, and do you think that was surprising to a lot of people? On my own reporting on this story, I saw a lot of people, questioning why he was doing this, and some people may be accusing him of, this being just a stunt because California is, as you mentioned, a quote unquote blue state, but the area where he is actually really, really far right, and the local city council is run by MAGA Republicans, right?
Yeah, the MAGA resolution did pass. They put that plaque in the library that says MAGA on it. But to the people calling it a stunt, I would say that every act of political resistance is a stunt in some way, right? I mean, this is the clip that's gotten millions and millions of views. We're talking about this. This is millions of people who are exposed to this little city's council and the policies going on there for the first time, I think that to call it a stunt is correct, and I think that it's not a negative thing.
That's a good point. That's actually an excellent point. And so, with this, we hope, of course, that people will be inspired by this action and take action themselves. Do you think that we need more notable figures like Chloe to put themselves on the line to inspire people? Or do you think that it really should fall on people in their communities?
I think that it falls on all of us. I would love to see more, especially like pro athletes, like in hockey, football, baseball, basketball. I would love to see more of them speaking out about issues like this because their voices do have a lot of weight. But I also want to see us, specifically us on the left in our communities, do a little more organizing. Because if you think about specifically like city councils, school board meetings, a lot of those, no matter where you are going to have people from Moms for Liberty, other conservative groups there. Even if they don't live in that community, they're going to show up there and try to get queer books banned. They're going to try to get lessons about race banned. And I think that we on the left need to be a little more proactive in our organizing instead of reactive. We need people and groups like that going to school board meetings, not just to speak out against Moms for Liberty or city councils doing shady stuff like this, but we just need people going regularly to advocate for what they believe in.
Yeah, and what is I guess you already touched on it. The consequence of not showing up is that decisions are made for us without us in the room, right?
Exactly.
All right, well, thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was really great.
And everyone, if you would like to read Ryan's most recent piece or any of their other work, you can go online to advocate.com, and we'll be right back. When we come back, I sit down for an exclusive interview with the stars of Revry's Unconventional, Kit Williamson and James Bland. Welcome, everybody. Today, I am joined by Kit Williamson and James Bland, stars of Revry's new series, Unconventional. Thank you both for joining me. How are you doing?
So excited to be the first guests on the Advocate's new podcast. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So you both were just telling me that this situation is really similar because this show actually came up. You were working on it during the pandemic, and I know I've spoken to Laith Ashley about that and how this series has been looking for a home for a while. So, Kit, how does it feel to finally land somewhere and have this show out into the world?
It feels so amazing that people are finally getting to see this incredible queer ensemble's work on screen weekly on Revry. streaming free everywhere right now. And it's had a long journey. It started back before the pandemic. I developed it at the Sundance Lab. And then during quarantine, we convened a writer's room, and James and I and the rest of the writers worked to develop all of these characters and these stories together. And it was so incredible. It was honestly something that really got me through a really challenging time, which I know it was a challenging time for everybody, but it was a real beacon for me and all of that.
Yeah. And James, what made you, what drew you to this story and wanting to take on this character?
Oh, the scripts were so damn good. Like when we started the room, Kit had already written the first 3 episodes. And so we got to really see where the story was going. We got to feel the characters on the page. And I hadn't seen anything like it. I could not point to another show on television currently or that existed before that felt like Unconventional. And so I want to see more versions of myself. I want to see more queer people. I want to see more just representation in general on television. And I think we were also in a time where we were starting to see, the same thing. Oftentimes Hollywood gets into this pattern where they want cookie cutter, versions of shows. And this was the antithesis, the opposite of that. And I wanted to be a part of something special. And this was an incredibly special show. And I could tell that it was going to be special from the moment I read it on the page.
Yeah. And Kit, I'm really, because you created the show, you wrote the show, you starred in the show. What shows that existed before this, if any, inspired this storytelling? Because there's so much of it. As James said, the characters, the actual storyline, but so much of just the direction just felt so. I hadn't seen anything like it before. Even the way the show starts, I was like, "Whoa, what did I just walk into?" And you immediately feel like you're getting to know these people in real life. It's I think it's incredible.
Thank you so much. We definitely set out to make something unconventional and asked ourselves at every point in the writer's room, has this story been told before? Have these characters been seen before exactly as we're representing them? And of course, no 2 characters are exactly alike. We are all beautiful snowflakes. But at the same time, we wanted to be as specific and as authentic as possible. That was something that was really important to all of us. As far as inspirations, I definitely wanted the show to be a spiritual successor to Eastsiders, which kind of came of age with shows like Girls and Fleabag and Looking, that sort of, half-hour iconoclastic break the mold that then became the mold in its own way. So we were always looking for ways to reinvent that. And another show that really inspired me in this was Giants, James's show that he created. I loved the way that Giants explored mental health issues. I felt like that was something I hadn't really seen explored in that way before. And that's something our show gets into very heavily as the season goes on.
Yeah. And so another thing, and we'll get into the actual story itself, but right off the bat, just from looking at the cast, just from the trailer, you are immediately aware that this show covers the entire LGBTQ plus spectrum. Was that something that was super intentional and important to you? Because we often don't see that. Even the shows that you've named, Looking is a great show, but it really didn't, it wasn't the entire community. It was a very small section of it.
And you're never going to represent the entire community with all of its nuances, right? We are limitless in terms of who we encompass. That's what makes the queer community so special, in my opinion, is that we have this opportunity to come together no matter what our backgrounds are. We have something in common, which is that in certain circles, we don't fit in. And we can find our commonality and our humanity and connect with each other in that way. We definitely were very mindful about tokenism and presenting characters in a way that felt fully rounded and human, rather than, let's be honest, it's standard practice in a lot of television for characters to come on screen, announce their identity, and depart the story immediately.
It's so interesting that you pointed that out, because I was going to ask you, how do you balance telling a story of the LGBTQ plus community and touching on some stereotypes. And you know, James, I'll ask you sort of how you felt about this, because some stereotypes are true, but how do you talk about those things or touch on those subjects without sort of painting in a way that seems like you're mocking it or anything like that? So even off the bat, like the first threesome that we see, I was just like, oh, okay, well, we're really getting into it. So what was that like?
Well, that's something that I think James and I have in common from our previous work as well. You know, with Giants and Eastsiders, it's trying to take an unflinching look at just a group of people and allowing them to exist and allowing their relationships to exist in the muddy sort of gray area of life.
Yeah. So James, you know, right now in the country, we are in desperate need of LGBTQ plus representation because of everything that is going on. And so this show might make some people uncomfortable because of the storyline I just spoke about, you know, sexual expression, gender identity, and, you know, the idea of same-sex parents. So knowing that this show might make people uncomfortable, is that almost sort of something you hope for? And like, what do you hope that that accomplishes?
Yeah, I mean, that's the purpose of art. I think art is supposed to make you uncomfortable, or at least it's supposed to make you think. It's supposed to make you consider things, and hopefully it makes you consider that although there are people out there who are different from you, at the end of the day, they're universal things in terms of love, in terms of family, in terms of just wanting to provide for your family and live a good life. And yeah, I totally get some folks may get uncomfortable with some of the scenes and some of the themes that we're exploring, but I also hope that they find windows to actually see themselves or their family members in the show.
Mm. And Kit, so you know your character in the show, it describes himself in the opening scene as, you know, being fucked up and being, you know, someone who doesn't have it all the way together. What is it like telling a story of someone who seems so different from, I mean, from the outside looking in, who people may expect you to be?
You've obviously never met me because I'm a mess. Everyone's a mess. You know, you can be a successful mess. You can be messy in you know your personal life and put together in your professional life, or vice versa, right? It takes all kinds. And I think that's something I really think is one of the truths of the show and truths of life, is that in our own special way, we're all a mess. Nobody knows the answers.
Yeah, that's so true, kid. Because even if you think about the people who may be offended or uncomfortable by the show, let's say more conservatives, behind closed doors, we all know they're a fucking mess. We've all gone to a church and have known that people show up to Sunday service and they present one way, and then you read in the news about the pastor or the first lady or the deacon doing things behind closed doors. They just don't necessarily present it or are honest about it. I think that's the thing that I love about what we're doing with this show, is that we're just being honest about the mess that we are, because like Kit said, we all have our things. We all have our stuff. Like with my show Giants, the common thread and theme was everyone has a giant. We all have something that we're up against that feels bigger than us. Again, it goes back to that universal, you know, thread, and being able to see characters and see just human beings live their lives out loud and find the relatability in it.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a lot in the writers' room. We talked a lot about expression of self and also how others perceive you. Through the character of Eliza, we deal with it really directly. Our characters are married, and my character is going to be the sperm donor to his sister, played by Aubrey Shea's girlfriend, Eliza, played by Brianna Vinskis. And that character is an interior designer with a fuck ton of Instagram followers who feels like for her business, she has to present a certain image of what a relationship and a business and a pregnancy is supposed to look like. So through that lens, we really wanted to confront sort of the millennial aspirational relationship to the internet and representation. Literally, we're all representing ourselves online, and I don't know a single person who's representing themselves fully authentically, because you do stop and think before you hit record, how will I be perceived? Something that in Gen Z talk I really like. They say sometimes, I do not wish to be perceived. And I very much relate to that.
Yeah.
Is there a character that either one of you related to more that may not have been yours? Because I really love that line in the first episode where she says, let's take a picture. And she said, why don't we just enjoy the moment? She said, sure, can we take a picture of me so I can remember that I enjoyed this moment?
Yeah, I fully relate to Brianna's character because I edit a lot in my life, and I overthink, and I curate. And so I get that experience, and I know where it comes from. You know, I grew up in the South. I grew up in the church. I grew up very closeted, and so it's kind of a default for me. I grew up in a way where I was always concerned about how I was presenting, how I sounded, checking my mannerisms to make sure I wasn't holding my wrist a certain way, or that no one could kind of see through this veil or the mask that I was wearing because there was a closeted homosexual behind it. And so sometimes I have to remind myself, honestly, to be authentic, or just to say, fuck it. Like, who cares? Things. So I was really able to relate to Eliza's in that way.
Yeah, I relate to all of the characters in different ways, but I do say I'm secretly an Eliza. Reasons, you know, like we are filmmakers, we have aesthetics that, you know, we want to put out into the world, and ideas that we want to put out into the world. And you don't want to misspeak or, you know, kind of fuck up your image or whatever. But then also, like, there's something really exciting about being a Margot and being the person who's just, fuck it, I'm going to do and say whatever I want. I'm very jealous of people who can live like that as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, you mentioned working on this during the pandemic. And so I know that was probably kind of like a hindrance. I mean, I'm not sure. I was stuck in Jersey the entire pandemic, so I'm not sure what it was like for you folks when you were actually making the show. But what was it like making a show with this kind of cast compared to other projects that you've done where there may have not been as many out LGBTQ plus people?
For me, I only do this, you know, homosexual propaganda. That's it. I'm only interested in making homosexual propaganda, unless you're paying me a lot of money, in which case I'll write whatever you want.
That makes sense.
I feel like there's a lot more freedom. I don't know. At least I didn't feel this way. I never felt like I couldn't pitch an idea or a storyline. There wasn't this feeling of like offense, I think, that I've experienced in other writers' rooms or on other projects where I think you're kind of afraid of tackling certain topics or characters. So I don't know, it just kind of felt free. It felt liberating in a way to work on this show and to be a part of this cast.
And what was it like to jump into the show, into the actual filming as actors? What was it like to take on these characters who were already in love? Because I feel like we often don't see that when it comes to queer television. We usually always find some boy who moved to a new city and he's trying to go to the nearest gay club and he meets someone who he thinks he's out of his league. We have like the same story over and over again. We rarely get to meet a couple like these two characters who have been together for a decade, who are already in love, who already have that sort of chemistry. So was that something that was maybe hard for you folks to capture?
I don't think so. I think the cool thing is Kit and I, of course, were in the writer's room. We knew exactly where the story was going. And it was cool to be able to start there, knowing where our characters were going to end up, kind of knowing the journey and the arc, and the potential of falling out of love, or how their love is questioned as a result of this third person, this interloper that enters their relationship. So I would say no, it wasn't difficult, but I think it was cool to start there. and then take that journey with these characters because they don't always stay there.
One thing that we got to do that I was very grateful for was to rehearse in the park. Once the world started opening back up a little bit, before we actually got into production, James, Aubrey, Brianna, and I would frequently meet in the park and read through scenes and new pages and rewrite pages together. And it was a really incredible experience to be able to form this group together with so much history and have so many conversations that aren't even, on screen about like what our backstories were like and where we beefed in the past and what we loved about each other too, because ultimately this is a story about people who may have a lot of conflict but who love each other deeply, all of them.
Yeah, I think it was also helpful that Kit and I had already spent time together with these characters, from the writer's room to us kind of doing readings together as Noah and Dan, even when he asked me, to play Dan. And so I felt very comfortable, with Kit and around Kit. And I felt comfortable with these characters. And I think in addition to that, and then the rehearsals that, Kit brought us into at the park, it just made it kind of seamless once we dropped in on set.
And again, just like such a highlight of a really horrible time, some of the first times leaving my house to get to hang out with a group of friends, post quarantine, were to create this group of friends who were friends on screen and have become friends in real life too, which is really special.
Yeah. And the story touches on, the story is basically about a couple who is trying to figure out whether or not they are on the same page with, what they want in life anymore. And that's a theme that's taken on right in the first episode. Have either of you experienced that in your relationships in real life? And what advice would you give to people in real life who are dealing with a situation where they have a partner that they might not know if they're on the same page anymore?
Gosh, first of all, if you're gay and you want to have kids, if you're a gay man and you want to have kids, get prepared to spend about $100,000. I
had one biologically 12 years ago.
Oh, amazing! So that you went the unconventional route. That's something we dig a lot into, starting really in episode 3, is the complexities of adoption and surrogacy. If you start going down like the kind of modern family route, they certainly make it seem like, you open a catalog, call a number, and hey, can you deliver the baby on Tuesday? It's not the reality of most people's situation. And honestly, like, it's something that really prevented me and my husband, who I've been with for 17 years, from really even conceiving of the idea of starting a family. Like it's a very recent even conversation in our own relationship, because it seems so incredibly out of reach. And this show is certainly not setting out to discourage anybody from starting a family through conventional or unconventional routes. But I do hope that it holds up a mirror to the realities that some queer people face, the challenges that some people face, queer people specifically, in family planning.
Yeah. And I would say find mentors if you can. You can think about people in your life who might have gone down this road. It'll be incredibly helpful. Even just partnership in general, and as a queer person, if you can find folks who are examples, who are married or who've been partnered for 10, 20 years, and kind of talk to them about some of the ups and the downs. And then if you have friends who have kids, whether it be a surrogacy or adoption, ask all of the questions. There'll be a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, and that was something that came out in our writer's room too. We had people who'd gone through the adoption process. Our executive producer and editor, Larissa James, was in the room with us while pregnant with twins. So she was our number one resource in going to talk about anything, biological pregnancy related.
Right.
And the one kind of commonality that I've found with other friends who have really long-term relationships like mine, which is that everybody's story is unique. You know, like there might be overlap. There's a Venn diagram for sure, but that's one of the incredible things about being queer and identifying as queer is once you accept that you're not going to fit a mold in that way, you start wondering, well, what else might not be true of me in my relationship? And that can be incredibly liberating.
Yeah. And so my last question before I let you folks go is you had some really great names and faces on this show, which took me by surprise. You know, your boss, editor, uh,
PhD advisor?
right. And so if we got another season of Unconventional, who would you dreamcast to be in the show?
Oh my God. Well, just maybe because she's top of mind, but Parker Posey is somebody who I have always said is my number one like dream to work with someday. And she's absolutely ripping it to shreds on White Lotus right now. She's from Laurel, Mississippi. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. And I've always felt like this thing when I watch her where I'm like, we would have been friends in high school.
James, anyone come to mind that you would like? Anyone? No one's off limits. Who would you in this world?
You just popped into my head, and I think because I just saw her on Instagram because it was her birthday and she looks fabulous. But Niecy Nash.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I think Niecy would be so
but she must play a police officer.
Anything.
She's a Reno 911 fan. I have been a fan of hers from the beginning. I'm obsessed with her.
She's so good. Yeah.
We need her in an iconic queer role.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she's always someone's police officer or security guard. So I just feel like we really need that. That's great. Thank you both so much for joining me. And what's Kit, if you can give people a quick summary of the show and where they can find it, let us know.
So Unconventional is a dark comedy about two eccentric queer siblings and their significant others trying to start an unconventional family in the California desert. It's set in Palm Springs and Joshua Tree. And you can find the show on Revry, which is a free app that you can download on any smart television. It's also a website. You can get it on your phone too. You can watch it for free with some bleeps and blurs, or you can watch the director's cut on their SVOD service if you subscribe. You can follow me at Kit Williamson.
You can follow me at JR Bland on Instagram, X, and all of the things.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
That is all for this week's episode of The Advocate Weekly. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode. Make sure to subscribe to The Advocate Weekly wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, I'm your host, Kevin Ortega-Rojas. Take care. To read more stories like the ones you heard today, go to advocate.com. This episode was executive produced by Kevin Ortega-Rojas. Special thanks to our associate producers, Kayla Gagnet and Alex Cooper, and Eric Bowie for technical support. Special thanks to Advocate staff writer Ryan Adamczeski and our special guests, Kit Williamson and James Bland.